We're going to switch gears a little bit with this next video. I had the privilege to interview Bruce Garner and talk to him about the book that he just released called The Resilient Pastor. And I was so encouraged after this interview, and I know you're going to be encouraged as you listen to this brief interview with Bruce Garner. Alrighty, welcome everybody. I'm excited about this next session. I have a good friend of mine named Bruce Garner. We're going to talk just a little bit about resilience. Bruce pastors Crosspoint Church in Huntington Beach, California. I had to pull him off his surfboard to get him to come do this interview. But he's doing a great job there. He's been there a long time. He's got a long history, and the BBFI asked him to share some of that here in just a moment. I wanted to say one thing before we get going, just so everybody's aware. I actually tested positive for COVID yesterday. So if I start coughing on this, you're not going to get it through the screen. But I just wanted to make you aware in case you hear a lot of coughing. I'll try to mute it or edit that in post-production, but just so everybody knows that's possibly the case. So I'm stuck in my basement right now, but that's the beauty of a virtual conference, right?
What a trooper. What a soldier.
We can do whatever. So Bruce, thanks for joining us. Excited about talking to you about your book that came out. When did it come out? Just a few weeks ago, officially, or months ago, officially.
Fall of last year, I think, is when it was finally published, around September of last year.
Good. But it was years in the process to put together. So we're going to talk through some of that, not years and years of process, but some of the things you learned through your book. So Bruce, take a second and just kind of introduce yourself, share a little bit about your background here in the BBFI.
Absolutely. Brothers, sisters, thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking a minute and listening to this. I love the BBF because I was born and raised in it. I'm 3 generations in our movement. My grandpa is M.O. Garner. He had a son named Les Garner. My dad and my mom and dad just celebrated 50 years as missionaries in Mexico, which is where I was raised. So I've been part of this tribe literally my entire life. And that's why I got interested in what I call pastoral resilience. Actually, several years ago, I went back to Biola University and took a doctoral program there. And that was my research question regarding pastoral health, longevity, that sort of thing, because having been in our movement so long, I saw the highs and the lows, both in our movement and in colleagues and friends, my own family, and obviously my own life.
Sure. Great topic. And I'm looking forward to just sharing or asking you a few questions about your research. But probably the first question, you hit on it just briefly because of family, your history and background in it. But why were you so interested in this topic? Was it something God laid on you? Where did this idea come from to talk about pastoral resilience? Maybe even define what that means to you.
Absolutely. I went back to get a doctorate because I was feeling stale. I felt like I'd hit my ceiling in a lot of ways, particularly as a preacher. I wanted to improve my preaching. And I wasn't really thinking about this topic at all. But I think about 7 years ago, twin journeys started. I became a volunteer police chaplain right across the county line in a city in Los Angeles County. And my older son started his journey toward what his career now. He's an infantry officer. So hanging around with cops and doing a deep dive into what the Army was doing to my son, I just noticed something striking, that police officers, everybody knows, have an extremely difficult job, and more difficult now than ever. And there was this abundance of professional literature, both for police officers and for soldiers and other members of the military, of how to increase their longevity, maintain their mental health, guard their emotional stability. And then that made me reflect on the fact that, having been raised in this movement, I've seen some of the most promising pastors in our movement burn up, blow out, disappear. They've gone one moment, nobody hears from them again. You hear the sad rumor that there was trouble with infidelity or with money, or he's just not the same man he used to be. He's bitter, he's tired, he's jaded, he can't give anybody a positive answer anymore. And after finishing 3 years of coursework, that led to the research question of my doctoral research. is there anything that we can control? Is there anything that we can do to increase our resilience, our longevity? And you've asked probably the most important question. What is resilience? Here's how I define that. A pastor's resilience, and it doesn't have to be a pastor. Obviously, it's any ministry frontliner. It could be a Sunday school teacher, Sunday school superintendent, certainly a missionary, anybody who's dedicated and devoted to ministry and going through the rigors of it. I say that resilience is the pastor's capacity to endure adversity, remain effective, and finish well. And this is a long answer, but let me just unpack that for a second. The capacity to endure adversity, because we know ministry's hard, and my research shows that. We're under a tremendous amount of pressure. Not all of us are doing well. Adversity is part of the package. And having endured that adversity, you have to remain effective. It's not enough to stay on the payroll. As they say in the military, you have to stay in the fight. You have to stay actively engaged with God and people. And the most important marker, of course, is to finish well. And that's probably the dumbest thing I've done, is to write a book on pastoral resilience while I'm still pastoring myself. The second dumbest thing would be to write a book on humility, which I don't think somebody's got to do it, but they should only publish it long after that man or woman has died. But the audacity of writing a book about pastoral health and longevity while I'm still in the trenches myself. I wrote it, honestly, Randy, I wrote it in self-defense. I did this work because I needed it. I could feel the toll that ministry was taking on me. As wonderful, as healthy, as solid as our church is, I could feel the pressures changing me and challenging me. That's why I did the work, and that's why I'm interested in helping you, brother, sister, stay in the fight, remain effective, stay in love with God, continue to bear with people and believe that God can do good things there. And at the end of our lives, on our deathbeds, be able to say that we've done it well and know that the Lord is pleased with what we've done.
Yeah, very good. I love that definition. Read that definition one more time.
Yes, sir. Resilience is a pastor's capacity. And capacity, it varies. If your physical health is compromised, if your emotional health is compromised, there's a varying degree of capacity, which is where the work comes in, the habits come in, which I'll maybe we can talk about in a minute. It's the pastoral resilience is the pastor's capacity to endure adversity, remain effective, and finish well. And that middle part, remaining effective, probably was, to me, one of the better discoveries, insights that resulted from the reading and the interviews and the surveys. It is not enough to retire from the ministry. It may be that you've been wildly ineffective in ministry for the last 8 or 9 years. Staying on the job is important, but it's insufficient. We see this with police officers. If they remain on the job, but they are not sufficiently resilient, they're not sufficiently healthy, they're dangerous. They're dangerous to the public, they're dangerous to themselves, they're dangerous to their colleagues. Police officers, good ones at least, keep a good eye on not only themselves, but on their colleagues, on their partners, because if you're not right, we both may be in danger if we get a dangerous call. So remaining effective. What can we do to remain effective? That's the heart of the research question. That's the heart of what this book tries to offer.
Yeah, that's great. And that's something I think a lot of people overlook, is that middle part, to remain effective. Not just if, we look at the stats, how many people retire in ministry that start, but I think that's a whole different level of looking at. To be honest, I didn't say this on the front end. This topic in your book and your research that you did, part was how I came up with the theme even for this 3-day virtual conference, to do hard things.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Because
that's cool.
That's what we're all in ministry, doing hard things.
Yes.
And if I live by this statement I heard a long time ago: if it was easy, everybody would do it.
That's exactly right.
Ministry is not easy; it's hard, but we can be wise in how we prepare for it and work in it at the same time. So
that's at the heart of the book. Ministry is not getting easier, and it won't. We've got a lot of. We won't take the time to talk about that, but just very briefly. Americans are becoming more secular and more fragile at the same time. Okay. As we move away from God, we are becoming spiritually and emotionally and mentally less healthy. In other words, the needs have never been greater. People have never, as a population across the country, have never been farther away from God. The younger the generation gets, the less likely they are to have any kind of Christian basis or worldview at all. So the constituency, our target, so to speak, people are supposed to be reaching and serving, it's getting harder to reach them. And at the same time, because of that pressure, we're getting more brittle, we're getting sadder, angrier, more hopeless. It's a disaster if we can't refurbish, if we can't revitalize ourselves, because we know the field's not going to get easier unless we lead large numbers of people to Christ. In a sentence, the work's not going to get easier, so let's get stronger.
Yeah, I was getting ready to say that. I followed you in a meeting in Texas last week or a couple weeks ago, the Texas Fellowship meeting. That's the quote everybody was still talking about after you left is ministry is not getting easier. We have to get stronger.
We have to get stronger. If we wait for the culture to move back in our direction, we'll probably wait for the rest of our lives. And
Wow.
we're putting some admirable effort into church planning and church revitalization. And I've had at least some experience in all of that. I'm calling for a movement for pastoral revitalization because we're no better and no stronger than the men and the women who are actually in the fight. That's why we have to get stronger.
Yeah. So it's, well, this could be a whole other doctoral dissertation or project to revitalize the church. You've got to revitalize the pastor.
Yes, sir.
First. So
that's it.
We talked a lot about, or some of this research that you accomplished a couple of years ago. We did a survey. We helped put it out through the BBFI, and you interviewed as many BBFI pastors as we could find. Talk a little bit about that research that you did,
yes,
and some of the things you learned from that research.
Absolutely. And thank you again. The dissertation would not be published, nor would the book have ever been finished without that survey. That was very, very insightful. Because this is my tribe, and with your help, I was able to survey senior pastors at the Baptist Bible Fellowship. That was the target audience. That was the response group. Missionaries were not included. So these are men and older men. We're a seasoned bunch. About 45% of the men who responded, senior pastors who responded, are over the age of 60. They have over 21 years of experience. We're a well-educated bunch. The vast majority of them had at least a graduate degree, college graduate or doctoral level degrees, but we're not doing so well, at least a segment. And I appreciate the honesty. And listen, if you answered that survey and you're one of those pastors that was struggling, I'm just reporting what the survey said to me. There's no judgment here. There's nothing but love and brotherly affection for you if you're struggling. But I would say roughly about a third of us are. With answers like this, about 24% of pastors responded that they did not love God more since they became pastors. A similar number said that they loved the local, I don't remember the exact phrasing of the question, but as a result of, here it is, yes, as a result of becoming a pastor, almost a third of them love the local church less. Those are alarming red flags saying that senior pastor is not well. And again, there's no judgment. Every single one of us, including the dork who wrote the book, could be taken down, right? Everybody has a limited capacity. We can all be overwhelmed by something. But for nearly a third, 25 to 33% roughly of pastors to consistently answer by survey questions, to honestly admit, I'm not doing well. Not doing well with my family. I'm not doing well with my God. I'm not doing well with my church. That was alarming to me. And that's really the state of our movement. About 2/3 of us are hanging in there with a reasonable amount of health, but fully a third of us are not doing well at all. And every time I think about it, I I stop and pray for the guy who's getting ready to quit. And if that's you, I really hope you don't. If I can personally help you, please reach out to me. You can find me on my church website, and I'd love to just listen, if nothing else, and remind you how much God loves you and how valuable you are to the Lord Jesus.
Yeah, amen. Hey, of the survey, what's maybe one of the things that surprised you as you looked at all the data that came through?
Two things, and I didn't really explore this very much in the book, but there is an irresponsible false statistic out there that has been quoted, and it's even been published, that basically says we're quitting in droves. Anytime you hear alarming statistics that 4 pastors quit every week, don't believe it. I did the research. I tried to track that statistic down, and finally was able to prove it doesn't exist. The group that is quoted is a real group, but no researcher has ever been able to find that. And Lifeway Research actually debunked it and showed that we're actually doing better than that alarming statistic that would say. So hear me saying two things at once. About a third of our own force is hurting, but we're not quitting in droves. We are more resilient and more capable actually than some books. Some are behind me here on my shelves. There's stuff in print that would make you think that we're in a widespread collapse, and it's just not true. So both surprising and encouraging, we are more resilient than we actually think. We are more resilient than some of the literature, which depended on bad research or non-existent research, would actually tell us. Pastor, give all the credit to Jesus, of course, but also give yourself a little bit credit. You're actually stronger than you think. You may feel miserable, but you can press on. You can reach out to God. You can put your arms around your brothers. You can move forward. We have some work to do, but this is not anything like the full house engulfed in flames catastrophe that so many are reporting.
Well, kind of as a follow-up to that, maybe, and I'm going off script a little bit, but
oh, that's great.
If they're not stepping out, are they in that middle part of your definition? Are they still effective? How is there any research that shows, that they're still in, but they're not effective? Because that's
I think my own research indicates that, and I want to be careful here, because the chair of my committee was a guy who's published a ton, Dr. Gary McIntosh, and he wrote the foreword to the book, so his name is linked into this as well. And I want to honor his mentorship. He kept telling me, "You keep telling me what you think. I don't care. Tell me what you can prove." Okay. So
I've heard that so many times.
that's how it works. So I can't prove this, and I'll condition it further. One bad thing about going through a doctoral program is you don't say nearly as many things with confidence the way you used to, right? Because there's so many factors and conditions and so much you may not yet know. But having said that, with that huge disqualifier, my survey would seem to indicate that roughly at least 20% of us in the ranks, at least when they took the survey at that moment, are not effective. They're the walking wounded. If this were in the military, they would be called casualties. They're not fatalities. They're not dead, but they're hurting, and they need triage. They need care so that they can get back to effectiveness. And again, the hopeful thing is every single one of us has been there. If you've been in ministry for more than 2 or 3 years, there have been moments where you cry out with David in Psalm 13, "How long are you going to forget me? How long are you going to hide your face from me?" That psalm, which is a key part of the book, is in scripture because it's real. A man after God's own heart felt not only abandoned, he felt ignored by God. And again, there's no judgment there. David was there. Jesus cried out from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" So feelings or thoughts of desolation, of hopelessness, those are real in the ministry. That's part of the fight. But again, we can come back, we can get better, but be very mindful. Probably if I could say anything right now in this section of the interview, at least to people in the ministry, don't confuse the fact that you're still showing up to the church office. You're still getting a paycheck. Do not confuse that with effectiveness. It might be faithfulness, but we must move along with our faithfulness to something vitally important, which is effectiveness. If a first responder shows up to the scene, but he is in such poor shape that he cannot help give the life-saving aid to those who have called him, that's a bad call, okay? And a first responder's first responsibility is to himself. The cops and firefighters I've seen in action, they take care of themselves, not in a selfish way, but because if they can't breathe, if they can't see, if they can't get down on their knees and do the life-saving work, somebody else will die. They owe it to themselves to show up ready to work and ready to give effective professional aid. That's an analogy for us as well.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, great illustration. Oh, similarly, when you're flying on an airplane and during the whole preview, everybody ignores, but it says when the gas or the mask drop down, put yours on first before you try to help someone else.
Absolutely. That's a chapter title, put your own mask on first. And that's something that I don't think we do very well for cultural reasons, especially as men. We have disdained self-care.
If a guy is going through this, and I don't want to skip ahead too much, but if a pastor is going through this, I think one of the strengths of the fellowship, and this is shown in some other surveys that we've done, is that we can depend on one another and the fellowship with one another. And I think it's one of the things we don't talk about in our movement and the fellowship enough. Is one of our strengths is that we have that band of brothers type of approach or feel.
We're a band of brothers. We're in this fight together. One of the neat things that I've learned, I'm very much in the cheap seats in the law enforcement community. I'm just a chaplain. I'm just a civilian chaplain. But in going to bad calls, right, and doing what no police officer wants to do, what nobody wants to do, which is what they call the chaplain force, so that the police officer doesn't have to deal with personally as much with the brunt of, say, a death notification or something brutal like that. The bond that you develop with the people beside you in those moments, the bonds that my son, the soldier, has developed in going through some rigorous infantry training. There's nothing like it. It really is a brotherhood. Unless you're on that scene wearing that uniform, doing that kind of work, it really is something alien to everybody else who isn't there. So guys, we're brothers. 45% of you, according to the survey respondents, said they would like coaching. They would like mentoring and encouragement. I'm nobody's coach, but if I can do anything for you, we're a band of brothers. We only have each other to do this work. We have the Lord and we have one another. And one of the greatest things that I've learned in my own walk with the Lord is to walk with a few other men, because when I'm failing and faltering, they can remind me of Jesus. They can show me the character and the compassion and the strength or the correction of Jesus, whatever I need at that moment. And I can get back into it and get back in the fight.
Yeah, great. Hey, over the last couple of years, I know this has kind of consumed a lot of your thinking and time, and from the research to writing the book to now speaking on this around the country. What's the most important thing that you've learned through this?
It's such a ministry cliche, but it is a fundamental truth that it really does start with your walk with the Lord. That's going to have ebbs and flows just like everything else. God is immutable. God does not change. We do. And the curious thing about shame and guilt is when we most need the Lord and when we feel farthest from him is when we are least likely to reach out to him. One of my, again, this is all in the book, a very well-known, very well-regarded pastor in our movement, and I didn't use any names of people who were kind enough to grant me interviews he said something very real. He said, sometimes I showed up to preach just because it was Sunday morning. I didn't want to be there. I just walked up and did what I was supposed to do because I'm an adult and I can't stay home. I can't drive off to the neighboring state on Sunday morning and leave people wondering where in the world I am. That's real. And again, the nature of resilience is that you are purposely developing a ready state of strength so that when it gets bad, you can answer the call. Okay. At the risk of talking too much about my older boy, the soldier, he has gotten, at least in our family's history, I think, unnaturally strong and developed an extraordinary physical capacity. And he is running and lifting more weight than I knew any man in our family ever could, because, we're a peacetime army. He might finish his career without ever firing a shot in anger, but he as an officer, he has a professional responsibility to be able to run far, lift heavy, show up to the fight when we're called upon to do it. That's professionalism. That's a loyalty. He talks about his platoon all the time. He's a platoon leader currently, that he owes it to his guys to train well, to be strong, to be ready, to be able to make decisions. That same kind of professional capability that we so admire, I think most men admire in the military and the law enforcement and first responders, that a firefighter can run through a building, fight his way through a fire, rescue a child, and get out. We owe it to the Lord and to ourselves to be getting stronger, more resilient, increasing our capacity, because we never know what we might be called upon to do or how we might be tested. And it all starts with our love for the Lord. If you feel distant from the Lord, be honest with yourself, be honest with your deacons if you can, do whatever you need to. Take the time it needs, take the money it's necessary to get away and rekindle that love that you first heard in the Lord's voice when he called you into the ministry.
Yeah, that's great. What are some habits, maybe? In the book, you talk about habits.
Yes.
To increase resilience.
Yep.
Share a few of those.
Absolutely. What I discovered, and this is the structure of the book. By the way, here's shameless product placement. Okay. How embarrassing.
There will be a link to purchase that in the chat below. So
the structure of that book, I'm going to open up the table of contents here. What I discovered was that there are 6 components of pastoral resilience. Here they are. Number 1, calling and preparation. Number 2, continuous spiritual growth, which is what I was telling you. That's what matters most. If you're only going to have one thing, continually growing spiritually would be important. So calling and preparation, continuous spiritual growth, self-care, emotional health, marriage and family health, and your leadership skill and fit. Resilience is like a life raft. If there's like a lifeboat, if there's a single breach in an inflatable boat, you're going to sink. So all 6 of those have to be kept an eye on. It's kind of like the oil in your car. If the oil's in good shape, but you have no water in your car, you've got a problem. We have to watch all 6 of those. And what the book suggests is 3 habits under each component, things that you can do, things that you can practice to make yourself, for instance, emotionally stronger, to remember your calling, to increase your preparation, to improve your leadership skill. And if there's probably, you asked me, I think for one thing, probably the single greatest difference to me, there've been 2 or 3 things that have made a difference to me personally. Again, I did all this work in self-defense to protect my own life, my own ministry, my own family, my own church. But the conscious practice of gratitude is probably the single most helpful daily practice that I've taken with me. Secular research, Dr. Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania, who, as far as I know, is entirely secular. He has the clinical research to show, and he argues in one of his books that in about 40 years of research and practice, he hasn't found anything as powerful as being purposely grateful. As it turns out, being grateful to God is not only commanded, it's incredibly good for us. So I don't do this every day, but I routinely sit and think and write a few things down at the end of the day that I'm grateful for. The specific practice that I recommend is writing down 3 things at the end of the day that you're grateful for. Then take another step and thank God for, think about why you're grateful for those things. And then do what Seligman wouldn't tell you to do. You turn to God with all of that. Okay? For instance, just this morning, I'm grateful that I can sit in a comfortable office. I own a laptop. I can do this. This is awesome. Why did I get to do this? Well, I got to do this because people are kind enough to ask. Thank you, Randy. I got to do this because BBF pastors, 200 or so, were willing to help me with the research. Dr. McIntosh and Dr. Boersma, my doctoral readers and supervisors on the committee, they invested 2 years, almost 3 years into my life and research, helping me get through this. When we consciously think about what am I grateful for on an average Tuesday, we discover we have far more to be grateful for than we actually realize. And then when we turn to God and just go write down that little list, here's 3 things, Lord, I'm grateful for, we find out we're worshiping. I mean, we've gone from journaling to actually worshiping God, and mindset makes such a difference. If you will practice gratitude, it will reframe even the difficult moments. Even the adversity can be reframed through the lens of gratitude, which is probably why Paul was telling us, while he's getting the tar beat out of him on a regular basis, often in prison, scarred, jailed, betrayed, abandoned, hungry, exposed to all kinds of dangers, the gratitude just flows through all of his epistles. Even the most heartbroken epistles he writes are filled with gratitude and blessing and praise to God, because he never forgot to be grateful, no matter how bad it got.
Well, that's such great recommendation or advice, to be grateful. You know, we're going to wrap this up.
Sure.
If for the pastors that are listening or missionaries listening, what's one last bit of advice you might give, whether that's a resource they could read besides your book? That's a given, right? What's something else?
Not necessarily. My mom told me she's reading it, but she hasn't said a thing about it. So, you know.
What's something that someone could do? A book they could read, a group they could be a part of, someone they could reach out to, including yourself. What's one bit of advice you would give them?
You absolutely can reach out to me. Just go to my church website, crosspointhb.org. Pastor Bruce Garner, Huntington Beach. I'm not hard to find. Reach out to me. A lot of people have my cell phone number. I give that out. I want to be in touch. I want to be helpful. Maybe to encompass all of this together, you know, maybe not a specific resource, but a specific practice. And that is to be brutally honest, Pastor, about what's really going on. One of the extraordinary findings in research was the story of Admiral Stockdale, who was in the Hanoi Hilton as a captured American pilot in the Vietnam War. Another writer developed what he called the Stockdale paradox, and here's what that means. They asked Stockdale, when he got out of the Hanoi Hilton, where he was tortured, starved, I mean, he really should have died. They said, you know, what made the difference between the men who got out and the men who didn't? And he said, yeah, well, the optimists died first. And what he meant by that was this: the guys who adopted a false positivity and said, we'll be out of here by Christmas. And then Christmas would come and go and they weren't out. And they said, well, that's okay, we'll be out by Easter. And then Easter would come and go and they'll say, we'll be out by next Christmas. They died of a broken heart. Stockdale had the fortitude, the insight, the God-given grace to do 2 things at once. He was absolutely realistic about the horrors of his condition. He faced the brutal facts of what was really happening. And at the same time, he had the undaunted belief that he would overcome and win in the end. That's the paradox. This is brutal. My church has split. We're way behind budget. I'm not paranoid. They're actually after me. They're sending emails around me. Staff has betrayed me. My preaching is not good. My wife is very upset with me. My children are embittered against God and ministry because of what we've been through in these last 2 years. All these horrible things that either drive people out of ministry, drive people away from the Lord, or at best, they hang in there, but they're not effective. They're brokenhearted. So the specific advice is be absolutely brutally realistic about what's really going on in your life. And then remember, Stockdale couldn't, I don't know if he was a Christian or not, you will win in the end. If they actually do kill you, I mean, if the ministry actually does kill you, you'll be with Jesus. You'll have your tears dried in heaven by God, it says at the end of Revelation. And it's that undaunted, it's not positivity, it's the undaunted realism that we can and we will overcome in the end that will make such a difference. So start with the hard part. In the book, I call this 1 minute self-awareness. Be absolutely, actually brutally honest with yourself and with God. If with no one else, be brutally honest with God and yourself about what's really going on in your life, how you're really doing. Because if you can't start with the truth of what's really happening, what's really going on, you'll never move toward the health, the restoration, the blessing, the recovery that God can always give you.
Wow, that's great stuff. Bruce, thanks for your time in this interview. It's been a blessing to me. And I've read the book, but just to get to hear you talk about it it's the passion that you have is encouraging. And I do pray often for the pastors of our fellowship, the missionaries, our ministry leaders, because it is a hard work. It's a hard job.
It is.
If it was easy, everybody would do it.
It is a heartbreaking job, but brothers and sisters, we can do it. And Randy, thank you for your time. I'm honored to have this opportunity to talk to you. And through this video to talk to our family of faith here in the BBF.
All right. Thanks. God bless.
Bless you, brother. Bye-bye.